For today's headlines, definitions of language, culture, and society, correlation between them, and the relationship between language and society exposed. Here are the full details.
Language, culture, and society. Rather than to be trapped in a chicken and egg scenario as to which comes which or which comes first, it is equally significant to raise if there is really a connection between these three. And the answer is remarkably simple at its core. And that's the thing that we need to find out today. Now let's take a look at what language means here. Language is a fundamental way of communication, so basically it's a tool, but not just that, because it is both organized and systematic. Because unlike any other communication systems and behaviors, in particular from animals, we have structures, systems, and even explicit rules. That's also the reason why human language is also considered as an organized noise. Noise in a sense that it's not annoying, but noise because before we come up with these lengthy discourses and utterances, we do have sounds and structure these sounds into patterns, various patterns, to concretize an abstract idea in order to express your feelings and emotions, and generally to transmit information from one person to another or even a group of people. How about culture? So we all know that culture can be learned the same way language is learned, and it's actually part of the society. So it's actually a way of life, everything in it. So basically, culture embraces all aspects, the terms in general of human life, or what it actually means to be human, whatever human means in your vocabulary, but it may either be material or immaterial, tangible or intangible. And one of the things we need to note about culture is that it has something to do with habits, accumulation of habits, notions, and even codes of behavior, and even the fixed point of morality as to what constitutes right or wrong, and even traditions, ritual ceremonies, and since time immemorial, and even right now, and even worldviews in general. Where does society kick in? So, society here is best defined again as a place where people are gathered with a set of relationship and even same interests. So, a society here serves as a springboard place where language and culture will interact. But then again, it shows the cyclical relationship of the three, and there is no one which is actually more important than the other because the three, language, culture, and society, are equally important within each other. And so, do you think there is a correlation between language, culture, and society? Yes, they are all related to each other. Because come to think of it, language, culture, and society have a correlation in the fact that language is an instrument, or even an embodiment of culture. It becomes a vehicle which carries our culture from one person to another, and culture is best illustrated in a particular society, even if we have different cultures individually. In fact, language is a communication tool used by everyone in their daily life as a means to convey information and even argue others to prove our point. In this case, the language cannot be separated from culture and society. Language represents its nation and identity, and even has a close relation to the attitude or behavior of groups of speakers of languages in a given society.
Meanwhile, let's find out the relationship between language and culture, individual and socialization. For the report, we have Trisha Ganyet.
Language and culture are inextricably intertwined with one another, and their relationship are best explained through the following indicators. First, language as part of the culture. Language and culture form a subordinate relationship wherein languages are always associated with the cultural sphere. Second, language and culture are systems attached in human life. Basically, culture acts as a system that regulates the human interaction in society, while language serves as a medium of the ongoing interaction. Now that we have learned the relationship between language and culture, let's now move on to the next subtopic. which is The Language and the Individual. Following the works of George Herbert Mead in relation to the subject matter, Ilya 2008 develops a theory about language and the individual, wherein it states that our perception plays a major role on how we interact and relate with the society that we live in. So our perception is inequated with our social relations. The theory also emphasizes the roles and symbols that are vital in understanding the individual differences and subjective meanings that humans imposed. So this time, roles are inequated with symbols. Now that we are done with language and the individual, let's move on to language and socialization. First, socialization basically involves the induction of new recruits. Before we socialize in the outside world, we first experienced it with our family. So our upbringing has a huge impact in our socialization. It is true also with how we develop our skills and know our roles in society. Moreover, speech or language also influences the young generation into nurturing the roles and aspirations in life. However, the pattern of social organization may vary from the rate of mastery of a certain language among adults. It is also evident in some cultures that specify the social setting in which children are allowed to speak. All in all, values and beliefs of a group are essential in the permissibility of speech, as well as their attitude towards it. Next, we have language and social context. And here are the following factors that influence the subject matter. First is the conversational interaction that allows a face-to-face conversation. We also have social norms such as shared concepts of appropriate and expected behaviors in the society. We have also reliance of routine and roles that would enable us to become better citizens. We also have social roles influencing meaning, like your role as an individual partaking in the betterment of the society that you belong. Next on the list, turn taking. Turn taking allows us to hear others' thoughts and opinions. Phrasing and clarification. These two are important in our way of understanding information that are given and provided for us. And lastly, we have the adjacency pairs as one of the factors. Adjacency pairs enables us to respond appropriately to a prior utterance. For the third subtopic under language and socialization, we have language and its cultural context. And here are the following insights regarding the subject matter. Culture is not solely determined by a person's language or nationality. From birth, we are socialized according to our cultural identity. Cultural values influence our daily actions through the language that we use. And most importantly, the language that we speak plays an important role in shaping our reality. This is Trisha Cañete for ELS News.
Still on language and socialization, let's have an update on customs and norms, code switching, and cultural bias from Aldrich Ravina.
Now moving on towards the customs and norms of language and socialization, many things can be considered that comes into play, whether that be social norms, language style, and even gender. For example, gender can affect how we use language. In terms of gender differences, girls are more likely to use language in the context of emotional relationships with others, while boys are more likely to use language to describe objects and events. Social norms, on the other hand, are unwritten rules of beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors that are considered acceptable in a particular social group or culture, and in this case, we can consider them to be culturally relative. So all societies have cultural norms, and language, of course, is a part of that. Now, moving on to communication accommodation. Accommodation is a process by which participants in a conversation adjust their accent, diction, or other aspects of language according to the speech style of the other participant. In this, we have the terms convergence and divergence. Convergence refers to strategies through which individuals adapt to each other's communicative behaviors to reduce these social differences. Meanwhile, divergence refers to the instances in which individuals accentuate the speech and nonverbal differences between themselves and their interlocutors. Now, this brings us to a topic also related, which is code switching. Code switching is the practice of moving back and forth between two languages or between two dialects or registers of the same language at one time. Code switching occurs far more often in conversation than in writing, and is also called code mixing and style shifting. So now, does multilingualism allow code switching? Now that could be a yes. For example, multilingual speakers often switch codes to a second language because they cannot find words that match the first language. Or teachers utilize multilingualism code switching to approach and accommodate linguistic needs and increase understandings and accuracies in lessons. Now, lastly, moving on to language and culture bias. Many things can be considered in this, like racist abuse, culture bias, culturally biased language, political correctness, race, gender, age, sexual orientation, or ability. So in short, these are language uses that prioritizes your own framework and own interpretation, which leads to prejudice. So it is an inclination towards your own preference, particularly in language and culture. Now, if you're wondering how native languages benefit the society, Relhea Mekate has the story.
How our native languages benefit society. The Philippines' numerous languages have economic potential. How? Multilingual people learn languages more easily, which a highly marketable experience. It's no wonder that Filipinos who are exposed to several languages growing up learn English and other foreign languages with comparable ease. Language diversity prompts the need for customized services, thereby diversifying the economy. If the measure of the Philippines, for example, were given official status by national or provincial governments, this would create a boom in activity to incorporate such as languages in educational materials, radio show, and newspaper. Language diversity coupled with supportive policies that have local languages intellectualized will help break the monopoly. This is really Mimikari for ELS News.
Well, how about the other advantages or benefits of such languages? J.R. Rifondo, tell us more.
Besides economic advantages, linguistic diversity has social and cultural benefits too. People have more language learning opportunities, more ways to communicate with one another, and more channels for artistic output. First, more channels for output and input, like the style, mood, and theme of literatures and language. Second, more tolerant society. Language diversity is more tolerant society. It is because revealing that there is a positive correlations between the linguistic diversity and peace, which debunks the myth that a country needs one language to be harmonious. Third, a diverse society is also more resilient. A diverse society is also more resilient because it is hard for government to manipulate diverse populations due to a multiplicity of internal language, cultures, and opinion. There are environmental benefits of having many languages, but we focus on three more important benefits of having many languages. First is enhanced communication skills. Multilingual children are exposed to more diverse social experiences. As a result, multilingual children often become adept at considering other people's perspective, making them more effective communicators. Second, heightened linguistics recognitions. Children are able to identify and distinguish linguistic sounds in the different language used. Third, superior executive functioning. Executive functioning skills are cognitive capabilities that include reasoning, planning, and problem solving. Thank you. This is JR Efondo for ELS News.
How do language and culture reflect each other? Here are the details. Now, many things can be considered in language and culture, and one of this is that they have a homologous relationship. Homologous meaning having the same relative position, albeit not entirely the same. So one of the factors in this is human interaction. But language is a vital part of human connection. Although all species have their ways of communicating, humans are the only ones that have mastered cognitive language communication. So language allows us to share our ideas, thoughts, and feelings with others, and language is one of the most important parts of any culture. Language and culture are interlinked. So as human beings, we are culturally bound to a society. This means that there cannot be a society without language and culture. Another related part of this is speech communities. A speech community is a group of people who share rules for conducting and interpreting at least one variety of a language or dialect. So the term can be applied to a neighborhood, a city, a region, or a nation. Speech communities are groups that share values and attitudes about language use, varieties, and practices. So these communities develop through prolonged interaction among those who operate within these shared and recognized beliefs and value systems regarding forms and styles of communication. Now, of course, all of that ties in with language and culture, as they both play a major role in these speech communities. So the phrase language is culture and culture is language is often mentioned when language and culture are discussed. It's because, again, the two have a homologous, although complex, relationship. Language and culture develop together and influence each other as they evolve. As I said before, they are intertwined. They progress together, influencing one another in the process, ultimately shaping what it means to be a human. Now, continuing on, how do language and culture reflect each other? This can also be seen on intercultural communication and the linguistic relativity principle. So intercultural communication refers to the communication between people from two different cultures. Intercultural communication is also a symbolic, interpretive, transactional, contextual process in which people from different cultures create shared meaning. So it seeks to understand the differences in how people from a variety of cultures act, communicate, and perceive the world around them. So this just shows even more how language and culture are heavily tied with each other and how they coexist and complement each other in various ways. So intercultural communication is therefore a key skill because it helps to bridge understandings across different groups characterized by different cultures, including organizations, disciplines, sectors, communities, social and political systems, and nations. On the other hand, we have linguistic relativity principle, which is a principle suggesting that the structure of a language affects its speaker's worldview or cognition, and thus people's perceptions are relative to their spoken language. The grammatical and more verbal structure of a person's language influences how they perceive the world, and in how people's perception changes based on their language, so too does their culture and how they see each other's cultures. So linguistic relativity suggests that the way we perceive and categorize reality is partly determined by the language we speak, and cultural relativity implies that verbalization of concepts is a particular language is often culturally conditioned.
Thank you, Aldrich. Next up, language variations and more will be given to us by Rilhea Mikate.
Language variations across culture. Language conventions refer to the variety of language that is predominant and generally accepted as the most proper form. Dialect, a specific kind of language spoken by a defined group or region. Accent occurs when speakers sound different when speaking the same language. People of cultures speak the same language. Societal or cultural influences, there can be two people speaking the same language, yet have any cultural similarity. Then what makes them speak the same language? Due to historical background. Aspect of language, language is not only words but also pronunciation, tone, and particular dialects. All of these parts of a language are shaped by culture. Language is created and shaped by the needs of a culture as it changes. This is really a main Mikati for ELS News.
How language ties with culture. Let's find out from Ivan Rich.
To best capture the relationship between language and culture, one has to illustrate the point of what we called the tying up of culture learning and language teaching. So, cultural learning or culture learning is best defined as a driving force for students to be able to learn and eventually master foreign linguistic systems. For instance, you are learning English language. In fact, it is stated or even encouraged as one of the methodologies of foreign language teaching is immersion, in which you will literally immerse, you will go to the place where there are native speakers or home speakers of the target language, the language that you are learning. In this case, the English language. But given the argument that it is too expensive or it requires a wealth of financial resources to go from there, so there are actually a lot of strategies and alternatives to learn the said language. For instance, watching movies with English subtitles. There's actually research on that. And as to the immersion process, why it's considered to be immersion? Again, as previously defined, culture is said to be a way of life, and it will show you everything, and part of which is language. Why? Because it allows you to interact, socialize, and have contact with these native speakers of the language. But then again, as I've already stated, there are many alternative strategies and methodologies for you to learn the target language.
Learning a language is learning the behavior of a given society. For more information, we have again Trisha Cañete. Trish?
Learning language is learning the behavior of the given society. As Taylor 1979 states, an individual's effectiveness in a foreign language is directly related to his or her understanding of the culture of that language. Furthermore, language is a product of a thought and behavior of a society. Thus, it is safe to say that we can't just simply single out language without considering the behavior of the society that uses it. This is Trisha Cañete for ELS News.
Immersion and transmission in language. JR, give us some more.
Immersion teaching accelerate the acquisitions of cultural knowledge. Language and culture as a medium for socializations. According to Peng Gao, stated that language and cultures learning is not intended to replicate or imitate the socializations of native speakers, teachers, but to develop the student's culture competence into intercultural competence. Transmissions of cultures and language. Language is learned, which means it can be culturally transmitted. Preschool children take on their first language from their exposure to random words they encounter in and out of their homes. The children gain initial language about the essential structures and vocabulary of the first language before the child started school. And language is the reasons why humans have histories that animals do not have. One of the main sources of language is through teaching and along with its culture. The culture of humans is as different as the world's language. They are likely to change over time. Industrialized countries that change in the language more rapid. Thank you. This is JR Efondo for ELS News.